Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step off a crowded New York street in the 1910s where the air hums with voices, carts rattle over uneven stone, and the smell of coal smoke drifts between tall narrow buildings that seem to lean toward one another like tired neighbours. You pause at a doorway that does not invite you in, so much as swallow you whole. Inside life compresses, sound tightens, space disappears. And just to set expectations, you probably would not survive this without a bit of stubborn resilience and a very strong tolerance for other people's cooking smells. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it share your location and local time, it is always a little comforting to know who else is wandering through history with you. Now dim the lights and step forward. The street behind you does not quiet so much as blur. The noise becomes muffled like someone closing a door on the ocean. Inside the tenement entrance, the air shifts immediately. It is warmer, but not in a pleasant way. It carries layers. Damp wood cooked cabbage soap that never quite rinses clean, and something metallic that lingers at the back of your throat. You notice how quickly your body adjusts because it has to. A widely accepted historical fact is that by the early 20th century, New York City had passed a series of tenement house acts aimed at improving living conditions, requiring things like windows, fire escapes, and basic sanitation. You might imagine that means comfort. It does not. It simply means that survival has been made slightly more structured. You stand just inside the doorway, letting your eyes adjust. The hallway stretches ahead, long and narrow, its walls marked by years of hands brushing against them, leaving faint streaks that no amount of scrubbing fully removes. The light is weak, filtering in from somewhere above or behind, never quite reaching the floor in a steady way. It flickers across surfaces, catching edges, then fading again. You take a few steps forward. Your shoes make a dull sound against the worn boards. Not a clean echo, but something softer absorbed. The building has learned to swallow noise, to keep it contained as if too much sound might cause it to spill over. Somewhere above you a baby cries. The sound is thin at first, then rises, then settles into a rhythm that feels almost practiced. A voice answers, low and steady, speaking in a language you do not immediately recognize. Perhaps Yiddish, perhaps Italian, perhaps something from further east. The exact words do not matter. The tone does. Familiar, tired, patient. You pause again. It is not hesitation, it is adjustment. A curious detail often mentioned by observers of the time is that some tenement residents kept small animals inside, not just cats, but occasionally chickens, or even goats tucked into corners or shared courtyards, adding yet another layer to the already crowded sensory experience. You glance toward a shadowed space near the wall, and for a moment you think you hear a faint rustle, something alive but quiet, choosing not to draw attention. You continue forward. The hallway narrows slightly, or perhaps it only feels that way as your awareness sharpens. Every inch of space seems accounted for. A pair of boots sits near a door, placed carefully as if even the act of removing them requires negotiation with the limited room available. A coat hangs from a hook, brushing lightly against your shoulder as you pass. It is still warm from its last use. You notice the doors. Each one is closed but not completely sealed from the life behind it. Light leaks through thin gaps. Sound slips through edges. A cough. A laugh. The scrape of a chair. You begin to understand that privacy here is not a fixed condition. It is something softer, something constantly shifting, negotiated moment by moment. Scholars still debate whether the psychological toll of such close living quarters had a lasting generational impact on immigrant communities, shaping not only behaviour but also long-term social mobility. Standing here, you do not need a study to sense that something about this environment presses inward, encouraging endurance but also demanding it. You reach a bend in the hallway. It is subtle, just enough to change your perspective. The light shifts again, catching on a small window set high in the wall. It is not large, but it's enough. a pale square that suggests the outside world still exists. Dust floats through the beams slow and steady like tiny fragments of time itself drifting past. You find yourself drawn toward it. You step closer, tilting your head slightly to catch a glimpse beyond. What you see is not a clear view but a suggestion. Another building equally close, its brick surface marked by age and weather. Between the two structures a narrow shaft of air. It is not much, but it is shared. Light moves through it, so does sound. You listen. Voices echo faintly from somewhere above. A pot clatters. Someone hums a tune that feels older than the building itself. The melody lingers for a moment, then fades, replaced by the steady rhythm of footsteps overhead. You step back. There is a strange balance here. Confinement, yes, but also connection. You are never alone, not entirely. Every movement, every sound becomes part of a larger pattern that the building holds together. You turn your attention forward again. The hallway continues leading deeper into the structure. You can feel the presence of the staircase ahead even before you see it. The air shifts slightly, carrying a faint draft that moves upward. It brings with it a cooler note, a hint of circulation that feels almost refreshing by comparison. As you walk, your hand brushes lightly against the wall. The surface is rough in places, smoother in others where years of contact have worn it down. You can almost trace the history of the building through touch alone. Countless people have passed this way. Countless routines repeated day after day until they become part of the structure itself. You slow your pace. There is no rush here. Or rather, the rush exists, but it belongs to the people who live within these walls. You're simply moving through, observing, letting the space reveal itself in its own time. Another door opens briefly ahead. A woman steps out, her movements efficient, her expression focused on the task at hand. She carries a small bundle wrapped tightly, and for a moment your eyes meet. There is no surprise in her gaze, only acknowledgement. You are another presence in a place already full of them. She moves past you, her steps quick but controlled, and disappears toward the entrance. The door closes behind her. The hallway settles again. You take a breath. The air is still heavy, still layered, but now it feels more familiar, less overwhelming. Your senses have adjusted, learned to filter, to prioritize. It is not comfort exactly, but it is something close enough to continue. Ahead, staircase, wait! You can see the first steps now rising in a tight curve worn at the center, where countless feet have pressed them down over time. The railing is smooth, polished not by design, but by use. It invites your hand without asking. You approach it slowly. This is where the building begins to reveal its vertical life. Floors stacked upon floors, each one holding its own version of the same story. You know, without being told that what you have seen so far is only the beginning. You place your foot on the first step. The wood creaks softly beneath your weight, not in protest, but in recognition. Another step. Another presence joining the endless pattern of movement that defines this place. You begin to climb. The staircase curves upward in a slow, steady spiral, and as you take the next step, the building seems to draw you further into itself. The air changes again just slightly. Less of the street now, more of something enclosed, layered, lived in. Your hand rests on the railing and you feel how smooth it has become, shaped by years of contact. Thousands of hands, perhaps tens of thousands, each one leaving a trace too subtle to see but impossible to ignore. You lift your foot again. The wood beneath you gives a quiet creak, not sharp, not alarming, just a soft acknowledgement of your presence. It is a sound repeated so often that it no longer startles anyone who lives here. Instead, it blends into the constant background rhythm of the building. You climb. The light grows dimmer as you move away from the entrance. There are no bright fixtures guiding your way, only the occasional weak bulb or the distant glow filtering down from somewhere above. In some buildings, gas lamps still flicker along the landings, their light uneven, their scent faintly sharp. In others, early electric bulbs hum quietly, a newer presence that has not yet fully replaced the old. A well-established historical detail notes that by the 1910s, Many New York tenements had begun transitioning from gas lighting to electricity, though the change was uneven and often incomplete, leaving residents to navigate a patchwork of illumination that could shift from floor to floor. You notice that inconsistency now. One landing holds a dim electric glow while the next is lit only by what little light drifts in from a distant window. You reach the first landing. It is small, barely more than a pause in the climb, with just enough space for a person to stand aside and let another pass. A door sits to your left, its surface worn, its paint chipped in places, where time has taken small, steady bites. You hear movement inside, a chair, scraping, a voice speaking quickly, then slowing, then stopping altogether, as if the speaker has remembered something important or forgotten something equally so. You continue upward. The staircase narrows slightly, or perhaps it only feels that way as the walls press closer around you. You become more aware of your own movement, of the way your shoulders align with the space, of how each step must be placed with quiet precision. Halfway to the next landing, you catch a new scent, soap strong and slightly harsh, mixed with the dampness of recently washed fabric. Somewhere nearby, someone is doing laundry, likely in a basin, water carried up by hand, heated if possible, though not always. You imagine the effort involved, the lifting, the scrubbing, the wringing. It is not a separate chore here. It is part of the constant flow of living. A lesser-known detail from the period suggests us that many tenement residents relied on shared or improvised washing spaces, sometimes even using hallway areas when private space was too limited, turning the building itself into an extension of the home. You glance toward a shadowed corner and see a bucket half full, a cloth draped over its edge, dripping slowly onto the floor below. You step carefully around it. The wood beneath your feet feels slightly damp in that spot worn smooth by water and time. You adjust your balance without thinking, your body already learning the small corrections required to move safely through this environment. You reach the second landing. Here the air feels warmer. Not fresh, not circulating, but held in place as if the building itself is keeping it from escaping. A door stands slightly ajar, just enough to let a thin line of light spill into the stairwell. You pause, not out of curiosity exactly, but because the light draws your attention. Inside you catch a glimpse, a table, a figure seated bent slightly forward, hands moving in a steady rhythm, sewing perhaps. The motion is repetitive, precise, almost meditative. The fabric shifts under their fingers, the needle catching the light for a brief moment before disappearing again into the pattern. You do not linger. The door closes gently, the line of light vanishing as if it had never been there. The stairwell returns to its dim, steady state. You climb again. The sound changes as you move higher. The street noise is now a distant murmur replaced by the internal life of the building. Footsteps above you. A cough that echoes faintly through the wood. The soft thud of something being set down, followed by a brief silence that feels almost intentional. You begin to notice the rhythm. It is not chaotic, not entirely. There is a pattern to it, a flow that repeats throughout the day. Movement up, movement down, doors opening, doors closing, voices rising then falling. The building breathes in its own way, expanding and contracting with the lives it contains. A question lingers in your mind. How many people share this space at once? Historians still argue whether the average occupancy of tenement apartments in this period was consistently as high as early reformers claimed, or if those numbers were sometimes exaggerated to push for stricter housing laws. Standing here, you can believe both possibilities. The space feels full regardless of the exact count. You reach another turn in the staircase. This one is tighter. The steps slightly more worn, their edges rounded from use. You place your foot carefully, feeling the subtle dip at the center where countless others have stepped before you. It guides your movement whether you intend it to or not. Your hand slides along the railing. It is warmer here, perhaps from the air, perhaps from recent contact. You imagine someone passing just moments before you, their hand in the same place, their steps following the same path. The thought does not feel intrusive, it feels expected. You continue upward. The light shifts again, this time growing slightly brighter. Not by much, but enough to change the way the space feels. You look up and see the source, A small window at the top of the stairwell letting in a pale diffuse glow. It does not illuminate everything, but it offers direction. You move toward it. The air near the window feels different, cooler with a faint trace of the outside world. You take a breath and notice the contrast. It is subtle, but it is there. A reminder that beyond these walls, the city continues in all its vastness. You pause for a moment. Below you, the staircase curves downward, disappearing into the shadow. Above you, it continues leading to floors you have not yet seen. You stand between them, suspended in the building's vertical rhythm. A door opens behind you. You turn slightly as a man steps into the stairwell, his movements quick, practiced. He carries a bundle under one arm, his other hand already reaching for the railing. He nods briefly in your direction, not stopping, not slowing, simply acknowledging your presence as he begins to descend. His footsteps are steady, confident. He passes you with ease, his body adjusting automatically to the narrow space. For him, this is not something to navigate. It is something known. You watch him go for a moment, then turn back to the stairs. There is a sense now that you are part of the flow, even if only temporarily. Your movements align with the building's expectations. You step when there is space. You pause when needed. You listen without trying. You place your foot on the next step. The climb continues. The building does not reveal everything at once. It unfolds slowly, layer by layer, floor by floor, each level holding its own variations of the same essential pattern. You understand now that to know this place you must move through it, not just observe it from a distance. You ascend. The stairs release you onto another narrow landing, and this time, instead of continuing upward, you turn toward a door that stands slightly open. The light behind it is warmer than the stairwell, softer, carrying with it the quiet suggestion of a lived space rather than a shared one. You hesitate for only a moment, then step closer, your hand brushing lightly against the edge of the door as you ease it open just enough to pass through. Inside the room reveals itself all at once. It is smaller than you expected, though perhaps that expectation had already begun to adjust. The ceiling feels low, the walls close, and yet everything within the space seems arranged with a kind of practiced intention. Nothing is placed casually. There is no room for that. You take a slow step forward. The floor creaks under your weight, a softer sound than the staircase, more contained. The air is warmer here, layered with the scent of food fabric and bodies that have occupied this space for hours, days, years. It is not unpleasant, but it is dense, holding traces of everything that happens within these walls. A commonly accepted historical understanding is that many tenement apartments of this era consisted of just a few small rooms, sometimes as little as 2 or 3, yet they often housed entire families, along with boarders who paid for a place to sleep. You look around and begin to understand how that arrangement works in practice. To your right, a narrow bed presses against the wall. It is not empty. A figure lies there, turned slightly inward, breathing slow and steady, perhaps resting between shifts or recovering from a long day. The blanket is thin, but it is carefully arranged, tucked, in a way that suggests both habit and necessity. There is no excess here. Everything serves a purpose. Near the bed, a small wooden chair sits angled toward a table at the center of the room. The table itself is worn but sturdy, its surface marked by years of use. Scratches faint stains the subtle shine, where hands have rested again and again. It is the anchor of the space, the place where meals are eaten, work is done, conversations unfold. You notice how close everything is. There is no clear division between sleeping, eating, and working. These activities do not belong to separate rooms. They overlap, sharing the same few feet of space, shifting in time rather than location. Morning becomes evening, not by moving elsewhere, but by rearranging what is already here. A curious and less widely discussed detail is that some families used folding furniture, or even suspended hammocks, to create temporary sleeping areas at night, then cleared them away during the day to reclaim space for other activities. You glance upward and see a hook in the ceiling, its purpose not immediately obvious until you imagine what might hang there after dark. You move further into the room. To your left, near a small window that lets in a muted, erect light, stands a narrow stove. It is compact, efficient, and clearly well used. A pot rests on top, its contents not visible but its presence unmistakable. The faint scent of something cooked lingers in the air, a mixture of vegetables, perhaps a bit of meat, stretched carefully to feed more than it comfortably can. Beside the stove a woman stands. Her movements are steady, practiced, her hands moving between tasks without hesitation. She glances at you briefly, not startled, not questioning, simply acknowledging your presence in the same quiet way as the man on the stairs. Then her attention returns to what she is doing. There is no time here for prolonged curiosity. You watch her for a moment. She adjusts, the pot checks something on the table, then reaches for a cloth draped over the back of a chair. Each motion flows into the next part of a rhythm that has been repeated so often it no longer requires conscious thought. You become aware of another presence. At the far side of the room, near what might be considered a second, even smaller space, partially separated by a thin curtain, a child sits on the floor. They are focused on something in their hands, perhaps a small object, perhaps a piece of fabric, turning it over with careful attention. The world around them continues, but their focus remains contained within that small task. You notice the curtain. It does not fully divide the space, but it suggests an attempt at separation. A gesture toward privacy, even if it cannot fully achieve it. You imagine that behind it another bed or sleeping area exists, shared, rotated, adjusted as needed. There is a sound from above, footsteps faint but steady moving across the ceiling. The building reminds you again that this room is only one part of a larger whole. Above, below, beside, life continues in parallel, each household following its own pattern while sharing the same structure. Some researchers have suggested that this constant proximity to others fostered a unique kind of social awareness among tenement residents where personal boundaries were understood differently, shaped more by sound and timing than by physical separation. Standing here, you sense that awareness in the way people move, in how they adjust without needing to speak. You step closer to the door. On its surface, a few items are arranged with care. A loaf of bread partially cut, a small container perhaps holding salt or something preserved. A cup, its rim slightly worn. Each object carries the weight of use of necessity. There is nothing decorative here unless it also serves a function. You reach out, then stop yourself. It feels important not to disturb the arrangement, not to interrupt the quiet balance that has been established. This space operates on a delicate equilibrium where even small changes can ripple outward. The woman moves past you. Her shoulder brushes lightly against your arm, not enough to push, just enough to pass. The contact is brief, unremarkable, another example of how space is shared rather than owned. You step aside instinctively. The room seems to shift around movement. Paths open and close, routes adjusted in real time. There is no fixed layout beyond the placement of larger objects. Everything else is fluid. You glance again at the bed. The figure there stirs slightly, then settles. Sleep here is not deep, not uninterrupted. It exists in fragments taken when possible, shaped by the rhythms of everyone else in the room. You take a breath. The air feels heavier now, or perhaps you are simply more aware of it. Each inhale carries traces of cooking fabric, human presence. It is a shared atmosphere in the most literal sense. You turn slowly, taking in the room once more. There is a sense of compression, yes, but also of adaptation. Every inch is used. Every object has been chosen, placed, adjusted to fit within the limits of the space. It is not comfortable by modern standards, but it is functional in a way that reflects constant negotiation. You begin to understand. This is not just where people live. It is where everything happens. Work, rest, care, conflict, routine. All contained within these walls, layered over one another, shifting throughout the day. You step back toward the door. The stairwell waits beyond cooler, dimmer, but also more open in its own narrow way. You pause at the threshold, glancing once more at the room behind you. The woman continues her work. The child remains focused. The figure on the bed breathes slowly. Life contained. You step out. The door closes gently behind you, and the sounds soften, becoming part of the building's larger rhythm once again. The stairwell greets you again with its cooler, dimmer air, but now your senses carry something with them from the room you just left. The warmth, the closeness, the quiet choreography of shared space. It lingers as you move only a few steps along the landing before another sound draws your attention. Water, not flowing freely, not rushing, but handled, lifted, poured. You follow the sound. At the far end of the landing, near a small alcove where the wall dips inward just enough to create a pocket of space, a woman stands beside a large metal bucket. The surface of the water inside it trembles slightly as she dips a smaller container in and lifts it out again, her movements steady and practiced. A basin rests on a low stool beside her, already half filled. You pause a short distance away. The act itself is simple. Water into container. Container into basin. Repeat. But there is effort in every motion. The weight alone demands attention. The careful balance prevents waste. Even a small spill matters here. A broadly recognized historical point is that many tenement buildings in the early 20th century still lacked fully private indoor plumbing, with families often relying on shared hallway faucets or courtyard pumps to collect water for daily use. You begin to see how that reality shapes everything. Washing's not just a routine, it is a process that begins long before the first splash touches skin. The woman glances at you briefly, then returns to her work without comment. There is no pause, no hesitation. Time and effort are too closely linked to be interrupted. You notice the floor, darkened slightly in the places where water has splashed and dried again and again. The wood has absorbed it over years, smoothing in some areas, roughening in others. You step carefully, aware of how easily your footing could shift if you're not paying attention. Another figure approaches from the opposite direction. A young girl, perhaps no more than 10, carrying a smaller bucket with both hands. Her steps are cautious but determined. The water inside sways with each movement and she adjusts her grip, instinctively correcting for balance in a way that suggests long familiarity. She reaches the alcove and sets the bucket down with a soft, controlled motion. No slosh, no spill. The woman nods slightly, a quiet acknowledgement, then begins to pour from the larger bucket into the smaller one, redistributing what has been gathered. The two work together without needing to speak. Each movement anticipates the next. You watch for a moment longer. It becomes clear that this is not an occasional task. It is woven into the structure of the day. Water must be brought, heated if possible, used carefully, saved when it can be. The rhythm repeats morning and evening, shaped by necessity. An unusual but documented observation from the time mentions that some residents developed specific schedules for using shared water sources, rising earlier or waiting later, to avoid long lines, turning even the timing of washing into a kind of quiet strategy. You imagine the coordination required. The small negotiations, the unspoken agreements that allow everyone to manage. You shift your attention to the basin. The water inside it reflects the dim light from above its surface, slightly clouded. A cloth rests nearby, folded ready. You can almost feel the temperature just by looking. Lukewarm at best, cooling quickly in the surrounding air. The woman dips her hands in. She moves them slowly at first, then with more purpose, lifting water and letting it fall again. She reaches for the cloth, wets it, wrings it out with a firm twist, then begins to wash her face. The motion is deliberate, efficient. No wasted movement. Every gesture serves a purpose. You become aware of the quiet, not silence, but a different kind of sound. The soft splash of water, the faint creak of the building, distant voices muted by walls and distance. It creates a space that feels almost contained within the larger noise of the tenement. The girl watches, waiting her turn. Her posture is patient but alert. She shifts her weight slightly, adjusting her stance as she waits. When the woman finishes, she steps forward without needing to be called. The exchange is seamless. The cloth changes hands, the basin remains, the rhythm continues. Some social historians have proposed that these shared routines, though physically demanding, also reinforced a sense of collective awareness among residents where daily survival depended not only on individual effort but on quiet cooperation. You can see that cooperation here not as something formal but as something understood. You take a step closer. The air carries a faint scent of soap, now sharper than before, cutting through the heavier smells of the building. It's not luxurious, not particularly pleasant, but it signals cleanliness in a place where that requires real work. You reach out slightly, then stop again. There is a pattern forming in your behavior. Observe, but do not interfere. Move, but do not disrupt. The space has its own balance, and you're learning how to remain within it. The girl begins to wash. Her movements are quicker, less practiced, but still careful. She splashes water onto her arms, her face rubbing with the cloth in short, efficient strokes. The water drips from her fingers back into the basin, each drop counted in a way that feels instinctive. You notice her expression, focused, not rushed but aware of time, of others waiting, of the need to complete the task and move on. Behind you, footsteps approach. Another resident carrying a bundle of fabric pauses just outside the alcove. They wait not impatiently, but with a quiet readiness. The sequence is clear. One finishes, another begins. The flow continues. You step slightly aside to make room. Again the space adjusts. It always does. You glance toward the stairwell. From here you can see how the building connects these moments. Water carried up, used, carried again. The effort repeated across floors, across families, across days that blend into one another. It's easy to overlook something like this from a distance. Washing your face, cleaning your hands, simple acts, but here each one is supported by layers of labour that remain mostly unseen unless you stand close enough to notice. You take a slow breath. The air feels different again. Not lighter, not heavier, just more familiar. Your senses are learning to separate the layers, to recognise the patterns within them. The woman gathers her things. The girl finishes stepping back, allowing the next person forward. The basin remains the water slightly lower now, its surface disturbed and settling again. You step away from the alcove. The stairwell opens before you once more, its worn steps waiting its dim light steady. Behind you the quiet cycle continues. Buckets, basins, cloth, hands. A rhythm that shapes the day as surely as any clock. You place your foot on the next step and begin to climb again. The stairs carry you upward once more, but this time the rhythm of the building feels slightly different. There is a subtle quickening in the air, a shift in energy that moves through the walls before you fully understand it. Doors open more frequently. Footsteps are more purposeful. Voices carry a sharper edge, not tense but focused. Morning is settling in. You reach the next landing just as a door swings open, releasing a brief wave of warmth and sound into the stairwell. The scent that follows is immediate and unmistakable. Bread slightly toasted. Something simmered, stretched into a meal that must serve many. You pause not out of hesitation, but because the moment invites it. Inside the room is already in motion. You step closer to the doorway, careful not to intrude, and let your eyes adjust to the scene. The table that last night held quiet activity now becomes the centre of something more urgent. Bowls are arranged. Hands move quickly, distributing portions, adjusting, making space where there is none. A commonly acknowledged fact about tenement life in this era is that breakfast was often the most reliable meal of the day, not because it was abundant, but because it had to be. Long work hours meant that whatever was eaten in the morning needed to carry a person through most of their labour. You can see that logic here, even in the modest portions. A man sits at the edge of the table, leaning forward slightly, his posture already shaped by the day ahead. He eats quickly, not hurried but efficiently. Each bite is measured, each movement economical. There is no lingering, time does not allow it. Across from him, a woman stands rather than sits. She eats in small moments between tasks, lifting a piece of bread, taking a quick bite, then returning to adjust something on the stove. Her attention moves constantly, balancing nourishment with responsibility. You notice how the space shifts again. The bed that held a resting figure earlier is now partially cleared, its blanket folded back just enough to create room for someone to sit. Another person occupies that space, tying a shoe, adjusting clothing, preparing to leave. A curious observation from contemporary accounts mentions that many tenement residents developed the habit of eating in shifts, especially in larger households, simply because there was not enough room for everyone to sit and eat at the same time. You begin to see that system unfold here. One person finishes, stands, moves aside. Another takes their place. You step back slightly as someone passes behind you. A young boy carrying a small piece of bread wrapped in cloth moves toward the door. His movements are quick practiced. He does not stop to eat here. Instead, he prepares to take his meal with him, perhaps to finish on the way to wherever his morning leads. The door opens wider. For a moment, the sounds of the street rush in again. Wheels against stone. Voices calling out in a mix of languages, the distant clatter of something metal striking against something equally unyielding. It is not quiet outside. It never is. You follow the boy out into the hallway. The stairwell now carries more movement than before. People descending, ascending, adjusting their paths to avoid one another without needing to speak. The building feels awake in a new way, its earlier stillness replaced by a steady flow. You begin to descend. The steps feel more familiar under your feet now, your body adjusting instinctively to their worn shape. You move with the rhythm rather than against it, stepping aside when needed, continuing when space allows. Halfway down, you pass another door. This one open just enough to reveal a different version of the same morning. Inside, a woman pours something into a cup, her movements slower, more deliberate. An older man sits nearby, his posture more relaxed, his pace unhurried. Not everyone leaves at the same time. Not everyone moves with the same urgency. The building holds many rhythms at once. Some historians have suggested that tenement households often operated on staggered schedules based on work type, with factory workers, street vendors, and home-based labourers all following slightly different daily patterns. You can see how that creates a layered sense of time within a single structure. You continue downward. The light grows slightly stronger as you approach the lower floors, though it remains filtered, softened by the narrowness of the space. The air shifts again, carrying a mix of scents that now include something sharper. Coffee, perhaps, or something close to it, brewed strong, stretched thin. You reach the entrance. The door stands open, held that way by the constant flow of people moving in and out. You step through and the street greets you with its full presence. It's louder than before, not overwhelming but insistent. Pushcarts line the edges of the street, their owners already calling out to passers-by. Produce bread, small goods, each item announced with a voice that must carry over the others. The air is alive with sound, layered and continuous. You pause just outside the building. Behind you, the tenement rises its windows, reflecting the early light in a muted way. It does not stand apart from the street. It is part of it, an extension of the same crowded, active world. In front of you, people move with purpose. Men in work clothes, their steps steady directed. Women carrying baskets, their pace adjusted to the weight they bear. Children weaving between them, quick and alert, learning the patterns of movement that will guide them through the day. You notice how close everything is. Home, work, food, noise, all within reach, all overlapping. The boundary between private and public feels thin, almost transparent. A small lesser-known detail from the period reveals that some families relied on street vendors for part of their daily meals, purchasing inexpensive food on the way to work, rather than preparing everything at home, especially when time or resources were limited. You watch as a man pauses at a cart, exchanges a few coins, and receives something wrapped quickly in paper. The exchange takes only seconds. He moves on, already eating as he walks. You take a slow breath. The air here is different, less contained, more open, but still heavy with the presence of the city. Smoke, food movement. It fills your lungs in a way that feels both expansive and demanding. You glance back at the building. You know now what waits inside, the narrow spaces, the shared routines, the constant adjustment. And yet it is not separate from what you see here. It feeds into it, supports it, depends on it. You turn your attention forward again. The day has begun. And like everyone around you, you move with it. You move with the flow of the street, your steps adjusting almost automatically to the rhythm around you. The boy you followed earlier is already ahead, slipping between adults with a kind of practiced ease that suggests this is not his first morning like this. He does not look lost. He looks directed. You follow at a slight distance. The street opens just enough to reveal more of its layered life. Pushcarts stand in loose rows, their wooden frames worn smooth by years of use. Vendors call out prices, their voices rising and falling in patterns that feel almost musical. You catch fragments of different languages, overlapping, blending, forming a kind of shared soundscape that belongs to no single place but exists fully here. The boy slows near a corner. You notice others gathering, children of varying ages, some carrying small bundles, others empty-handed, all waiting in a loose cluster that shifts constantly as new arrivals step in and out. There is no clear line, no strict order yet. Everyone seems to understand where they belong. You step closer. A door stands open beside the group, not wide but enough to reveal a narrow interior space. A woman stands just inside, speaking in a firm but measured tone. Her voice carries authority, though not harshness. The children listen more attentively than others. A widely accepted historical point is that compulsory education laws were increasingly enforced in New York during the early 20th century, requiring children to attend school for at least part of the day, though enforcement varied and many families still depended on their children's labour. You begin to see that tension here. The boy steps forward. When his turn comes, he speaks briefly with the woman, his voice low, then nods and moves inside. The exchange is quick, efficient, not ceremonial, simply part of the routine. You linger near the entrance. Inside the space is modest. Rows of benches, a small board at the front. Light filtering in through windows that do not fully brighten the room but offer enough to work by. A few children already sit their attention divided between the front of the room and the quiet interactions among themselves. You notice the atmosphere. It is not entirely still. There is movement, small and contained, a shift in posture, a whisper, the scrape of a bench against the floor. Learning here is not silent, but it is structured. The woman at the front continues speaking. Her words are clear, deliberate guiding. She gestures toward the board, then toward the children, inviting participation, expecting it. There is patience in her tone, but also expectation. Time is limited. There is much to cover. You step back from the doorway. The street draws your attention again. Not all children enter. Some remain outside, lingering near the carts, their focus directed elsewhere. A boy slightly older than the one you followed moves toward a vendor offering to help arrange goods in exchange for a small coin or perhaps a piece of food. A lesser-known detail from the period notes that many children in tenement districts took on informal jobs such as selling newspapers, assisting vendors, or running errands, contributing small but meaningful amounts to their household income. You watch as the boy lifts a crate, his movements careful but strong, placing it where the vendor indicates. He receives a nod in return. No words are needed. You begin to walk again. The street carries you forward past more buildings, more doorways, each one holding its own version of the same balance between obligation and necessity. You pass a group of girls walking together, their conversation light but purposeful. One carries a small book, another a bundle of cloth. They speak in low voices, their steps in sync. You catch a fragment of their words. School, yes, but also something else. Work to be done later. Tasks waiting at home. The day does not divide cleanly for them. It layers. You slow your pace. There is a question forming, one that does not have a simple answer. To what extent did education truly change the trajectories of children growing up in these environments? Historians continue to discuss whether schooling in tenement districts provided a meaningful path toward upward mobility, or if economic pressures often pulled children back into labour before those opportunities could fully develop. As you watch the children move through their morning, you can sense both possibilities existing at once. You turn down a narrower street. Hear the noise soften slightly, though it never disappears. A man stands near a doorway handing out folded papers to passing boys. Newspapers. The boys take them quickly, tucking them under their arms, already preparing to sell them further down the street. You follow one of them for a moment. He calls out headlines as he walks, his voice rising above the general hum. The words are sharp, attention-grabbing, designed to pull people in. He moves quickly, adjusting his path to intercept potential buyers, learning the subtle art of timing and placement. You notice his expression. Focused, alert, not distracted. This is work. You step aside as he passes, letting him continue on his route. The street shifts around you, again, new figures entering your awareness as others move out of view. You glance back toward the school. The door is now partially closed, the morning session underway. The children inside are settling into their tasks, their voices quieter, more contained. Outside, the rhythm continues different but connected. You begin to understand how the day unfolds for them. Morning lessons, afternoon errands, evening responsibilities. The boundaries between these parts are fluid, shaped by need rather than strict schedules. You take a slow breath. The air carries the scent of bread again, mixed now with something sweeter from a nearby cart. The sounds of the street form a steady backdrop, constant but not overwhelming. Your senses adjust, filtering. Focusing. You look around once more. Children moving through space that demands awareness. Learning not only from books, but from every interaction, every task, every moment that requires them to adapt. You turn slightly, letting the flow of the street guide you onward. The day is still early, and already it is full. You let the current of the street carry you a little farther, then slow as you approach the familiar stretch in front of the tenement again. It does not feel like a boundary so much as a threshold that never fully closes. Inside and outside blend here. The doorway behind you still breathes out warm air while the street pushes in with noise and motion that never quite settles. You pause near the edge of the sidewalk. This is where the building opens itself to the world, not politely but constantly. The pavement is uneven beneath your feet, worn smooth in places by years of traffic. Wheels pass close, their wooden rims clattering against stone. A horse shifts its weight nearby, its breath visible in the cool air, its presence steady and patient amid the rush. Voices layer over one another. A vendor calls out the price of apples in a sing-song cadence. Another answers with bread fresh enough to claim whether or not it truly is. A woman negotiates, her tone firm but measured, her hands already reaching to inspect what she might buy. You hear English, but also Italian, Yiddish, Polish, and sounds that blend and overlap until language itself becomes part of the background texture. A well-documented historical reality is that neighborhoods like the Lower East Side were among the most densely populated places on Earth in the 1910s, with thousands of residents packed into just a few city blocks, creating a level of street life that felt almost continuous. Standing here, you do not need numbers to understand it. The density is immediate. It presses in from all sides. You shift slightly to avoid a pushcart being maneuvered into position. Its owner works quickly adjusting the wheels, setting up a small display of goods with practiced efficiency. The cart itself becomes a temporary shop, a moving piece of the street that can appear, disappear, and reappear elsewhere within minutes. You watch as customers gather, not in a line, not in any strict order, but in a loose cluster that forms and reforms as people step forward, make their purchase, then move on. The exchange is quick. Coins pass from hand to hand. Food is wrapped in paper or cloth. Words are brief, direct, rarely wasted. You notice how close you are to everything. If you extend your arm, you could touch the cart. Turn slightly and you're nearly brushing against the building wall. The space between them is narrow, but it holds an entire world of activity. A more obscure anecdote from the period describes how some street vendors developed signature calls or even short rhymes to distinguish themselves from competitors, creating a kind of informal branding long before the term existed. You listen more carefully now and begin to pick out patterns. Certain voices repeat phrases in a particular rhythm, making them recognizable even before you see the speaker. You step closer to the building again. The doorway remains open, people passing in and out with a steady cadence. A woman exits, carrying a basket, her steps careful as she navigates the narrow space between cart and curb. A man follows behind her, adjusting his coat as he steps into the street, already scanning for where he needs to go next. You linger at the threshold. From here you can feel both worlds at once, the relative dimness and compression of the interior behind you, and the restless shifting openness of the street ahead. Neither is entirely separate. Each feeds into the other. You glance upward. The building rises above you, its windows close together, some open, just enough to let air move through, others closed tightly. From one a piece of fabric hangs out to dry, moving slightly in the breeze that finds its way between the structures. From another, a voice calls down sharp and clear, reaching someone below who looks up in response. Communication here does not always require proximity. It travels vertically as easily as it does across the street. You step away from the doorway and letting the flow of people guide you towards the curb. A group of children passes their energy, quick, their movements less constrained by the patterns that shape the adults around them. One of them pauses briefly at a cart eyeing something with interest, then is called back by another, the moment passing as quickly as it formed. You notice the constant negotiation of space. No one stands still for long unless they have a reason. Even then, they shift to just make room. The street is shared in a way that requires constant awareness, a quiet understanding of how to move without colliding, how to pause without blocking. Some urban historians have explored whether this kind of densely interactive environment fostered stronger community bonds or simply heightened stress levels among residents, with evidence suggesting that both outcomes existed side by side. As you stand here, you can sense that duality. There is connection in the familiarity of faces in the repeated exchanges, but there is also pressure in the lack of distance. You turn slightly, watching a man unload goods from a larger wagon. He works with another, the two of them lifting crates in a rhythm that feels almost synchronized. They speak only occasionally, their coordination relying more on timing than instruction. The crates move from wagon to cart to customer, each step part of a chain that keeps the street alive. You take a slow breath. The air is full layered with scents that shift depending on where you stand. Fresh bread, damp wood, animal presence. Smoke from somewhere further down the block. None of it dominates for long. It blends, changes, moves. You begin to walk along the edge of the street. The tenement remains beside you, its wall a constant reference point. Doors appear at intervals, each one leading into a space like the one you visited earlier, each one holding its own version of the same compressed life. A woman steps out of one of them, pausing to speak with someone already on the sidewalk. Their conversation is brief but familiar. A question, an answer, a shared understanding. Then they part, each returning to their respective paths. You continue. The street stretches ahead, but it never feels open in the way you might expect. It is full, always full, each segment occupied, each moment active. There is no empty pause, no true stillness. And yet within that constant motion, patterns emerge. You begin to recognize them. The way people approach a cart, the way they step aside at the last moment to avoid a collision, the way voices rise and fall depending on distance and need. It becomes almost predictable even as it remains dynamic. You slow again. The tenement entrance is now just behind you, but its presence remains. You carry it with you, just as those who live here carry the street back inside with them. The boundary between the two is not a line. It is a flow, and you are moving within it. You drift back towards the building almost without deciding to. The street still hums behind you, but something quieter pulls you inward again. The doorway feels familiar now, less like an entrance, and more like part of a continuous path you have already begun to understand. Inside, the air folds around you once more. The sounds soften, but they do not disappear. They rearrange themselves. The rhythm becomes closer, more contained, more personal. You step into the hallway and notice how the pace here differs from the street. It is not slower, but it is more deliberate. Each movement has purpose. A door opens ahead. You recognize the room from earlier, or one very much like it. This time the activity inside has shifted. The morning rush has passed, leaving behind a quieter, but no less demanding set of tasks. You step closer. Inside, the table is no longer set for eating. Instead, it has become a workspace. Fabric is spread across its surface, carefully measured, folded and cut. A woman sits beside it, her posture slightly bent forward, her hands moving with practiced precision. She lifts a piece of cloth, inspects it, then sets it aside and reaches for another. There is no pause between actions. You notice another figure near the window. A man sits on a low stool, his attention fixed on a small ledger. He writes slowly, carefully, his brow slightly furrowed as he keeps track of something that matters enough to record. Numbers, perhaps, expenses, payments owed or received, the details of survival translated into ink. A widely recognized historical pattern shows that many tenement households supplemented their income through home-based work, often referred to as piecework, where tasks like sewing garments or assembling small goods were completed within the apartment itself. You can see that system in motion here. The room has shifted from home to workshop without changing location. You step further inside. The space feels even smaller now, not because it has changed, but because its function has expanded. More people, more movement, more objects arranged within the same limited area. The balance becomes more delicate. Near the corner, a narrow bed is now partially occupied by a stack of finished items. Shirts perhaps, or parts of them folded neatly and arranged in a way that suggests they will soon be collected or delivered. The bed is no longer just for rest, it becomes storage workspace extension. A small, less commonly mentioned detail from the time notes, that some families rented out portions of their already crowded rooms to boarders who worked similar jobs, creating a shared labour environment where multiple individuals contributed to the same type of piecework. You glance toward the far side of the room and notice another person, not part of the immediate family, perhaps seated quietly working with equal focus. No one speaks. The silence is not complete, but it is purposeful. The sound of fabric shifting, the faint scratch of pencil on paper, the soft exhale of breath as someone adjusts their posture. It creates a different kind of atmosphere than the morning meal. Less hurried, but more sustained. You move slightly to the side as someone passes behind you. A woman carrying a small basket steps carefully through the room, navigating the narrow paths between table, bed and stove. She sets the basket down near the door and begins to sort its contents. Small items, perhaps materials needed for the work, thread, buttons, pieces that will soon be incorporated into the larger task. You notice how every object has a place, not fixed but understood. The table holds the current work, the bed supports what has been completed, the basket contains what is yet to be used. The room becomes a system, each part connected. You take a slow breath. The air carries a different set of scents now. Less of food, more of fabric and dust. A faint dryness mixed with the warmth of bodies and the constant presence of the building itself. You watch the woman at the table. Her movements are steady, but there is a subtle tension in them. Not visible at first, but present in the way her hands do not pause for long, in the way her shoulders hold a certain firmness. This is not optional work, it is necessary. Some scholars have explored whether home-based labour in tenements provided a flexible economic opportunity for families, or if it primarily reinforced cycles of low wages and long hours without significant advancement. As you observe the room, the answer does not feel simple. There is autonomy here, but also constraint. You shift your attention to the man with the ledger. He pauses, looks over what he has written, then adds another line. His expression suggests calculation adjustment, an attempt to make numbers align in a way that supports the household. You imagine the balance he is trying to maintain. Income against expense, work against time. You step back slightly. The room feels full, not just of people and objects, but of effort. Continuous, layered effort that fills every available moment. A knock sounds at the door. It is soft but clear. The woman near the basket moves to answer it, opening the door just enough to reveal another figure outside. A brief exchange follows. Words are spoken quickly, quietly. Something is handed over. Something else is received. The door closes again. The items are added to the basket, the cycle continuing without interruption. You begin to understand how the outside world connects to this room. Materials come in, finished goods go out. The street and the tenement are linked through these exchanges, each one small but together forming a larger system that sustains the household. You glance toward the window. The light has shifted slightly, moving across the floor in a narrow band. It does not brighten the room fully, but it marks the passage of time in a way that feels gentle, almost subtle. You take another step back toward the doorway. The sounds of the hallway begin to return, faint at first, then clearer. Footsteps. A distant voice, the building reminding you that this room is one of many, each one holding its own version of this same balance between living and working. You pause at the threshold. Inside, the work continues. Outside, the flow of the building resumes. You step out. The door closes softly behind you, and the quiet, focused energy of the room blends back into the larger rhythm of the tenement. You return to the stairwell once more, and this time the building feels different again. The morning has settled into something steadier, less hurried but no less full. The air carries a new layer, now one that clings more closely to fabric, to skin, to the very boards beneath your feet. Work has begun elsewhere, and it has followed people back inside. You descend a few steps, then pause as a door opens just ahead of you. A man steps out, adjusting his sleeves as he moves into the stairwell. His clothing carries a fine layer of dust, barely visible at first, but unmistakable when the light catches it. It dulls the colour, slightly softens the edges of the fabric. He brushes at it absently, not to remove it entirely, but to reduce its presence. The gesture is automatic, repeated so often it no longer requires thought. He nods briefly as he passes you, his expression neutral, already focused on whatever comes next. You notice the smell, faint but distinct. Not unpleasant, but dry, almost chalky. It lingers in the air after he moves on, mixing with the other scents of the building. A well-established historical reality is that many tenement residents worked in factories or workshops where conditions often involved exposure to dust fibres or chemical residues which they then carried back into their homes on their clothing and skin. You begin to understand how that connection blurs the boundary between workplace and living space. You continue downward. Another door stands open, and this time the activity inside draws your attention immediately. The room is similar in size to the others you have seen, but the atmosphere is different. More concentrated, more contained. You step closer. Inside, two figures sit at the table, their hands moving quickly over pieces of fabric. The motion is faster than what you observed earlier, less measured, more urgent. The fabric shifts rapidly under their fingers, the needle passing through in a steady rhythm that feels almost mechanical. The air here is thicker. Tiny fibres float just above the surface of the table, catching the light in brief flashes before disappearing again. You can feel them when you breathe the faint dryness at the back of your throat. You watch for a moment. The work does not pause. It continues uninterrupted, each piece completed and set aside with a quick, practiced motion. Another is picked up immediately. The cycle repeats. A lesser-known observation from the time suggests that some garment work done in tenements was subcontracted from larger factories, allowing companies to reduce costs by shifting part of the production process into private homes. You see how that plays out here. The factory is not entirely separate. It extends into this room, into this building. You step slightly inside. The floor beneath you feels different. Not just worn, but layered with the fine particles that have settled over time. You adjust your footing, instinctively aware of how easily the surface could become uneven. One of the workers glances up briefly. Their expression is not unfriendly, but it does not invite interruption. It acknowledges your presence, then returns to the task at hand. Time here is measured in output in pieces completed in minutes that cannot be wasted. You step back again. The doorway frames the scene, allowing you to observe without becoming part of it. The sound of the needle moving through fabric blends with the quieter sounds of the building, creating a rhythm that feels both isolated and connected. You continue along the hallway. Another figure approaches from the opposite direction, this one carrying a bundle of clothing draped over one arm. The fabric is clean, or at least cleaner than what you have just seen, but it carries its own signs of use. Folds where it has been worn. Slight discolorations that no washing fully removes. They move carefully, keeping the bundle balanced. You step aside to let them pass. The space adjusts again, as it always does. A question forms quietly as you move. How much of this work remains visible, and how much goes unnoticed by those who benefit from it? Historians continue to examine whether consumers of mass-produced goods in this era were fully aware of the conditions under which those items were made, or if the distance between production and purchase allowed for a kind of quiet disconnection. Standing here, the connection feels immediate, impossible to ignore. You reach the next landing. The light is slightly brighter here, enough to reveal more detail in the surfaces around you. The walls show subtle marks where hands have brushed against them. The floor worn into shallow patterns that guide movement without instruction. You lean lightly against the railing for a moment. Below you can hear the faint echo of the street. Above, the softer sounds of the rooms continue. You are positioned between them again in that narrow space where the building's different layers meet. A door opens behind you. You turn slightly as a woman steps out, her hand still holding a piece of cloth. She pauses, looking at it, adjusting a small detail with her fingers, then folds it neatly and tucks it into a basket she carries at her side. Her movements are precise. Even here in the hallway, the work continues. A small unusual detail recorded by some observers mentions that residents often used any available moment, even brief pauses between tasks, to continue their work, turning hallways, landings, and even stairwells into extensions of their workspace when needed. You see that adaptability now, how the boundary between room and corridor fades. She nods to you as she passes. Again, that quiet acknowledgement. No need for words. You straighten and continue your descent. The building feels heavier now, not physically, but in the sense of what it holds. Labour carried up and down, brought in, taken out, repeated in cycles that overlap and intersect. You step onto the next set of stairs. The wood creaks softly beneath you, the sound familiar now, almost reassuring in its consistency. Your hand finds the railing without looking, your body moving, with a confidence that comes from repetition, even if your time here has been brief. You descend. The air shifts again as you move lower, the scent of dust and fabric gradually blending back into the broader mixture of the building. The sounds change too, the sharper rhythm of work softening into the more general hum of daily life. You take a slow breath. The layers remain, but you are beginning to distinguish them more easily. The way one activity leaves its trace then gives way to another without ever fully disappearing. You reach the bottom of the stairs. The entrance waits ahead the street just beyond, but you do not step outside yet. Instead, you pause, because now you understand something you did not before. The work does not stay where it begins, it follows, and it settles into everything. You linger near the entrance, but the air inside begins to change again this time, carrying a heaviness that does not come from people alone. It builds slowly, almost unnoticed at first, then settles into your skin with quiet persistence. Heat. Not the sharp, immediate kind, but something thicker, trapped, held in place. You turn back towards the stairwell instead of stepping outside, drawn by the way the building seems to gather warmth rather than release it. As you begin to climb again, you feel it intensify with each step. The air grows denser, less willing to move, as if the walls themselves are holding on to the day. By the time you reach the next landing, your breath feels slightly slower. The hallway here is still almost completely still, no breeze, no shift, just warmth layered of heat over warmth settling into every surface. A widely documented aspect of tenement living is that ventilation remained a persistent problem well into the early 20th century, especially in older buildings where interior rooms lacked direct access to fresh air, creating conditions that could become stifling during warmer months. You begin to understand that not as a fact, but as a sensation. You move forward. A door stands open just a fraction enough to let the heat inside spill into the hallway. You step closer and the difference is immediate. Inside, the air feels thicker, almost tangible, pressing gently but constantly against your skin. You glance in. The room is arranged much like the others, but the atmosphere changes everything. A woman sits near the window. Her movements slower now, not from fatigue alone, but from the effort of working in this kind of heat. She lifts a cloth, wipes her forehead, then returns to her task with quiet determination. The window is open, but it does little. Outside, the air offers no relief. It hangs just as heavily between the buildings, moving only when forced, and even then only slightly. You notice how the fabric near the window barely shifts, its edges lifting and falling without any real direction. You step back into the hallway. Even here, the warmth remains. It has settled into the wood, into the walls, into the very structure of the building. A lesser-known detail from contemporary reports mentions that some residents sought relief by sleeping on rooftops or fire escapes during especially hot nights, turning any available outdoor space into a temporary refuge from the indoor heat. You imagine the building at night, its residents climbing upward, not for work or routine, but simply to breathe more easily. You continue upward. The staircase feels different now. Each step carries the warmth upward, concentrating it in the higher floors. Your hand on the railing picks up the heat stored in the wood, a subtle but constant reminder of how little the building cools. At the next landing you pause. A door is fully open here, and inside the room has been rearranged slightly. The table has been pushed closer to the window as if proximity might offer even a small advantage. A child sits nearby, fanning themselves with a folded piece of paper, their movements slow but continuous. You notice the effort. Even rest requires action here. A man lies on the bed, not asleep but still conserving energy. His shirt is loosened, his breathing steady but shallow. The heat does not allow for full relaxation. It holds the body in a state of quiet awareness. You take a slow breath. The air feels heavier, now filling your lungs with a weight that lingers just a moment longer than you expect. You become more aware of your own movement, of how each step requires a little more intention. Some researchers have explored whether prolonged exposure to poorly ventilated, high-temperature environments contributed to chronic fatigue and health issues among tenement residents, though the extent of that impact remains a subject of ongoing discussion. Standing here, the question feels less abstract. The strain is immediate physical. You move away from the open doorway. The hallway offers only slight relief, but enough to notice the difference. You continue toward the stairwell, drawn again by the idea of movement of change, even if it is minimal. A figure approaches from above. A woman carrying a small bundle descends slowly, her steps careful, her pace measured. She pauses briefly at the landing, adjusting her grip, then continues downward. As she passes, you feel the warmth she carries with her, not just from the air, but from the effort itself. You step aside. The space accommodates both of you just barely. You continue upward. The higher you go, the more the building seems to hold on to the day. The air thickens further. The light softens into something almost hazy. You reach another landing and pause again this time, near a small window set into the stairwell wall. You move closer. The opening is narrow, but it offers a glimpse of the outside. Another building stands just beyond its surface, close enough that you could almost reach it. Between them, a thin column of air moves slowly upward, carrying with it a faint suggestion of relief. You lean slightly toward it. The difference is subtle but noticeable. A slight cooling, a hint of movement. You close your eyes for a moment. Even this small change feels significant. You open them again. The building continues around you, its structure unchanged, its conditions constant. The window does not solve the problem, it only softens it briefly. You step back. The hallway remains the warmth steady, the air unmoving. You begin to understand how the day unfolds in this environment. Work continues, but more slowly. Movements are measured, energy conserved where possible. Tasks that require more effort are spaced out, adjusted to fit within what the body can manage. You take another step. The wood beneath your feet creaks softly, the sound familiar now grounding. Your hand rests on the railing, your body adapting to the conditions without fully realizing it. You descend a few steps, not to leave, but to feel the shift again. Slightly cooler below, slightly heavier above. The building layered not just in space, but in temperature. You pause midway. There is no clear escape from it, only variations. You take a slow breath. The heat remains, but your awareness changes. It becomes part of the background, something to be managed rather than resisted. You continue moving, because here that is what everyone does. They adjust, they endure, and the day goes on. You move back down the stairs, drawn toward a different kind of awareness now. Not just what you see or even what you feel, but what you hear. The building begins to reveal itself through sound layer by layer, as if each wall carries a voice that refuses to stay contained. At first, it is subtle, a faint murmur behind a door, the low rise and fall of conversation that you cannot quite make out. Then, as you step onto the next landing, the sounds begin to separate, each one gaining its own place in the space around you. A child laughs somewhere above, not loudly but clearly enough that it travels down the stairwell, echoing softly as it goes. The sound lingers for a moment, then fades into the background. You pause. There is something about the way sound moves here that feels different. It does not stay where it begins, It shifts, bends, travels along surfaces, slipping through cracks and around corners. A frequently noted aspect of tenement construction is that thin walls and shared structural elements allowed sound to carry easily between apartments, making it nearly impossible to achieve true quiet or privacy. You can hear that reality now, not as an idea, but as a constant presence. You take another step. From behind a nearby door you hear a voice speaking in a steady rhythm. The tone is calm, measured, perhaps reading aloud or reciting. Something learned. Another voice answers, softer, repeating the words with slight hesitation. A lesson taking place within the limits of a small room. You move a little closer, then stop. It feels like stepping into something private, even though the building itself does not fully allow for that separation. You remain where you are, listening without intruding further. The voices continue, then pause, then begin again. You shift your attention. Further down the hallway, another sound emerges. A song, quiet at first, then growing slightly stronger as you move closer. The melody is unfamiliar, but it carries a sense of familiarity in its structure. Something passed down, remembered, repeated. You follow it. The door it comes from is closed, but not tightly. The sound slips through the edges, filling the hallway with a soft, steady presence. You can almost picture the scene inside. Someone working perhaps, or resting, the song accompanying the motion. A small but interesting detail from the period mentions that music, whether sung or played on simple instruments, often served as a form of comfort and cultural continuity for immigrant families, helping preserve traditions in an unfamiliar environment. You can feel that purpose here even without seeing it. You continue walking. The song fades as you move past, replaced by another set of sounds. A sharp exchange of words, louder, more urgent. Two voices overlapping, rising slightly in pitch, not shouting but close to it. The tension is clear even if the words themselves remain indistinct. You slow your pace. The argument does not last long. It rises, holds for a moment, then begins to settle. The voices lowering again, returning to something more controlled. The building absorbs it as it does everything else. You take a breath. There is no single sound that defines this place. It is the combination, the layering, the constant presence of something happening just beyond your immediate view. Some scholars have explored whether this continuous exposure to others' lives shaped a heightened sense of awareness among residents, or if it created a kind of emotional fatigue over time. Standing here, you can imagine both. The closeness connects, but it also demands. You reach another landing. Here the sounds gather more densely. A baby crying from one room, a pot being set down in another. Footsteps moving above their rhythm. Steady, almost predictable. You lean slightly against the wall. Even that contact brings you closer to the sound. It travels through the structure, not just the air. You can feel faint vibrations, subtle but present, as if the building itself is participating in the conversation. A door opens nearby. A woman steps out, her expression neutral, but her ears clearly attuned to what is happening around her. She pauses for a moment, listening, then moves on, adjusting her path as needed. You watch her go. She does not seem surprised by any of it. The sounds are not interruptions. They're part of the environment. You continue down the stairs. The pattern follows you. New sounds replace old ones, but the overall rhythm remains. A steady presence of life expressed through voices, movements, small moments that overlap and intertwine. You reach the lower level again. The entrance stands open, and with it comes the louder, broader sound of the street. Wheels, voices, distant calls. It blends with the building's internal noise, creating a layered soundscape that extends from inside to outside without a clear boundary. You step just outside, then stop. From here, you can hear both worlds at once. Behind you, the closer, more intimate sounds of the tenement. Ahead, the wider, more diffuse noise of the city. They do not compete. They coexist. You turn slightly, looking back at the building. The windows above hold their own quiet strees. Some open, some closed, each one a point where sound might escape or enter. You imagine the voices behind them, the songs, the conversations, the small arguments that rise and fall throughout the day. A question settles in your mind. How does one find quiet here? Researchers continue to examine how residents adapted to this constant auditory environment, whether by learning to filter it out or by incorporating it into their sense of normalcy. As you stand here, you begin to feel that adjustment yourself. The sounds no longer feel overwhelming. They feel expected. You take a slow breath. The noise does not stop, but it changes, and you are beginning to hear it differently. You step back inside once more, leaving the broader noise of the street behind, though it never fully disappears. It softens as the doorway closes behind you, folding back into the closer, more intimate rhythm of the building. The air feels steadier now, and with it comes a different kind of quiet. Not silence, but intention. You move along the hallway, slower this time. There is a shift here that is not tied to work or urgency. It is something more deliberate, more reflective. You notice it first in the way people carry themselves. Movement softens slightly, voices lower. Even the sounds that travel through the walls seem more measured. A door stands open ahead. You approach without thinking, drawn by the faint glow of light inside. It is warmer than the hallway, but not in the same way as before. This warmth feels gentler, more contained, as if it has been shaped with care. Inside the room is arranged differently. The table remains the centre, but its purpose has changed again. A cloth has been laid across it, clean, carefully placed. On top, a few small items rest in quiet order. A book worn but treated with respect. A candle, its flame steady, casting a soft light that reaches the edges of the room without fully illuminating them. A widely recognized aspect of tenement life is that religious and cultural practices remain deeply important for many immigrant families, offering structure, identity, and comfort amid the challenges of urban life. You begin to see that importance here, not as a formal display, but as something woven into the everyday. A woman stands near the table, her posture calm, her hands resting lightly at her sides. Across from her, two children sit close together, their attention focused. They are quieter than before, their movements more restrained, as if they understand that this moment carries a different weight. You remain at the doorway. There is no need to step inside. The scene feels complete as it is, and your presence is already part of it, even from here. The woman begins to speak. Her voice is soft but clear, each word placed carefully. The children listen, their eyes following her, their expressions attentive. You do not need to understand the language to recognize the tone. It carries meaning beyond the words themselves. You notice the stillness, not absolute but intentional. The usual background sounds of the building continue, but they seem to recede slightly, as if making space for this moment. A lesser-known detail from the period reveals that many families adapted their religious practices to fit the limitations of their living space, creating small, intimate rituals within their apartments, rather than relying solely on formal places of worship. You can see that adaptation here. The room becomes more than a living space. It becomes a place of meaning. You take a slow breath. The air carries a faint scent of something familiar, perhaps wax from the candle or a hint of food prepared with care. It is subtle, but it adds to the atmosphere, grounding the moment in something tangible. The children respond. Their voices are quieter, less certain, but steady. They repeat something, perhaps a phrase, perhaps a line they have learned. The exchange is gentle, patient, without pressure. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the balance. There is a sense here that time has slowed, even if only briefly. The demands of the day have not disappeared, but they have been set aside for a moment, allowing something else to take their place. Some historians have explored how these small private rituals helped maintain a sense of continuity for immigrant communities, preserving traditions that might otherwise have been lost in the transition to a new environment. As you watch, you can feel that continuity. It does not require a large space. It only requires intention. The candle flickers, just slightly, as if responding to a movement in the air. The flame steadies again, holding its place, casting light that shifts gently across the surfaces of the room. You glance toward the window. It remains closed, the outside world held at a distance for now. The focus stays within the room, within this moment. The woman's voice softens further. The children listen, then respond once more. The pattern repeats, not hurried, not forced. It unfolds at its own pace, shaped by something deeper than routine. You feel the difference. This is not about efficiency or survival, though both remain present. It is about meaning, about holding on to something that cannot be measured in the same way as work or time. You take another step back. The hallway begins to return to your awareness, its sounds gently rising again. Footsteps, a door closing somewhere further down. The building continues even as this moment holds its own space. You glance once more into the room. The candle burns steadily. The voices continue soft and even. The children remain focused, their attention anchored in the present. You step away. The doorway narrows behind you, the scene becoming less distinct, then blending back into the general rhythm of the building. You move along the hallway again. The shift you felt remains with you, even as the sounds and movements of daily life resume their usual pace. It lingers, a quiet reminder that within the crowded, demanding structure of the tenement there are moments that reach beyond it. You reach the stairwell. The air changes, slightly cooler, more open, though still shaped by everything around it. You place your hand on the railing, feeling its familiar surface beneath your fingers. You pause. There is something grounding in that contact, something that connects all the layers you have experienced so far. You begin to descend. The building continues to unfold each level, offering its own version of life, its own balance between necessity and meaning, and you move through it one step at a time. You step down into the street again, but this time your attention shifts almost immediately toward the food that surrounds you. It is not presented in neat rows or quiet interiors. It exists out here in motion, in voices in hands that prepare and pass it along with practiced speed. The smells reach you first, warm bread slightly crisp at the edges, something simmered rich but stretched, a sharper scent, perhaps pickled vegetables cutting through the heavier air. You follow it without thinking, your steps guided by the subtle pull of familiarity and curiosity. A cart stands just ahead. Its surface is crowded with items arranged carefully to maximize space. Loaves of bread stacked in uneven rows. A small container of something preserved, its contents glistening slightly in the light. A pot set to one side, steam rising gently, carrying with it a scent that feels both simple and complex at once. You move closer. The vendor stands behind the cart, his movements quick but controlled. He reaches for a loaf, slices it with a practiced motion, then adds something from the pot, wrapping the result in paper before handing it over to a waiting customer. The exchange is smooth. Coins pass from one hand to another. Words are spoken brief and efficient. The next customer steps forward without needing to be called. A well-supported historical observation notes that immigrant communities in New York often preserved their culinary traditions through both home cooking and street vending, creating a diverse food culture that reflected many regions of Europe and beyond. You can see that diversity here not as a display but as a lived reality. You step aside as another person approaches the cart. A woman examines the bread, carefully pressing lightly against its surface, checking its texture. She nods satisfied and completes a purchase. The vendor moves on without pause, his hands already reaching for the next item. You continue along the street. Another cart catches your attention, this one offering something different. Smaller portions, perhaps sweets arranged in a way that suggests they are meant to be shared or saved for later. The colours are muted but distinct enough to stand out against the more neutral tones of the street. You notice a child standing nearby. They watch the cart with quiet focus, their hands held close as if considering whether to spend what little they might have. After a moment, they step forward, exchange a few coins, and receive a small piece wrapped carefully. The moment is brief, but it carries weight. A lesser-known detail from the time mentions that many families relied on preserved foods such as pickled vegetables, dried fish, or cured meats not only for their flavour, but for their ability to last in environments where refrigeration was limited or non-existent. You begin to see how that necessity shapes what is available, what is valued. You turn back towards the building. Inside, the same patterns continue, but now you carry a clearer sense of how food connects the two spaces. What is prepared here often begins elsewhere. Ingredients brought in, transformed, shared, extended as far as they can go. You step into the hallway again. The air shifts the street receding behind you, but the scents follow lingering in the space. You move toward a door that stands open, drawn by a familiar combination of warmth and movement. Inside the room is active once more. The table holds a different arrangement now. A loaf of bread sits at its center, partially cut. A pot rests on the stove, its contents stirred slowly by a woman who watches it with careful attention. The smell is stronger here, more concentrated, filling the room in a way that feels almost comforting despite its simplicity. You step closer. A man sits at the table, breaking off a piece of bread, dipping it into the pot, then bringing it to his mouth. His movements are steady, unhurried, as if this moment allows for a brief pause in the day's demands. Across from him, a child waits, their eyes following each motion. When the man finishes, he shifts slightly, making space. The child steps forward, taking their turn without needing instruction. You notice how the meal unfolds, not all at once, but in sequence. Each person finding their moment, their portion within the limits of what is available. Some food historians have explored how recipes in tenement households often adapted over time, blending elements from different cultures as ingredients and circumstances changed, creating new forms of traditional dishes. You can imagine the evolution here in the way the meal reflects both memory and necessity. You glance toward the stove. The woman adjusts the pot, adding a small amount of something from a nearby container. The change is subtle but intentional. A flavor extended, a portion increased, a meal made to serve just one more. You take a slow breath. The air feels warmer here, but also fuller, shaped by the presence of food in a way that differs from the heat you felt earlier. It carries a sense of care even within constraint. You step back slightly. The room continues its quiet rhythm. Eating, preparing, waiting, each action flowing into the next without interruption. You move toward the doorway. The hallway receives you again, its sounds returning, its air shifting back to its usual state. The scents fade slightly, but they do not disappear entirely. You begin to walk. The building holds these moments, just holds everything else. Meals shared in small spaces. Flavors carried from one place to another. Traditions adapted, preserved, reshaped. You reach the stairwell. The light filters down from above, soft and steady. You place your hand on the railing, feeling its familiar surface beneath your fingers. You pause. There is something grounding in the repetition of these movements, in the way each section of the building reveals a different aspect of life, yet remains connected to the whole. You begin to descend. The street waits below with its carts and voices and constant motion. Inside the rooms continue their quiet work, their careful preparation. Between them you move, carrying the taste, the scent, the sense of how something as simple as food becomes part of everything. You do not step all the way outside this time. Instead, you remain near the lower level where the building gathers everything and holds it close. The air feels heavy again, but not from heat alone. There is something else layered into it now, something quieter, less visible, but deeply present. A cough echoes from somewhere down the hall. It is not loud, not sharp, but persistent. It repeats after a moment, then again, settling into a rhythm that draws your attention without demanding it. You turn slightly, following the sound as it travels through the narrow space. You move toward it. The hallway narrows as you go, the light dimming slightly, the sounds becoming more contained. The cough continues, joined now by another softer sound. A voice speaking in low tones, steady, reassuring. You approach a door that stands closed but not fully sealed. A faint line of light slips through the edge. You pause there, not opening it, but listening. Inside the sounds are clearer. The cough again, followed by the rustle of fabric, then the murmur of someone speaking, gently repeating the same phrase as if it carries comfort. A well-documented reality of tenement life is that illness could spread quickly in crowded living conditions where limited ventilation and shared spaces made it difficult to contain even common ailments. You begin to understand that not just as a risk, but as a constant presence. You remain where you are, inside a small movement. The sound of water being poured into a cup, the soft clink of something set down, then the voice again, steady, patient. You take a slow breath. The air here carries a different quality. It feels closer, more still, as if even the building is holding itself quiet around this moment. A lesser-known observation from the period notes that many families relied on home remedies passed down through generations to treat illness using whatever ingredients they could access rather than formal medical care, which was often too expensive or distant. You imagine what might be happening inside. A cloth placed against a forehead, a mixture prepared carefully, small acts of care repeated again and again. You step back slightly. It feels right to give the space distance, even if the building itself does not fully allow it. The cough softens, not gone, but less sharp. The voice continues, quieter now, almost a whisper. The rhythm shifts, becoming slower, more measured. You turn and begin to walk back along the hallway. The sounds of the building return gradually. Footsteps, a door opening somewhere above, the faint echo of voices from another floor. Life continues even as moments like this unfold within it. You reach a small window set into the wall. It offers only a narrow view, but the light it provides feels important. You stand there for a moment, letting your eyes adjust to the contrast between the dim hallway and the pale brightness outside. You take another breath. The air near the window feels slightly different, though not enough to change the overall atmosphere. It is a reminder rather than a solution. You move on. Further down the hall, another door stands open, and this time the scene inside is more active. A woman moves quickly between bed and table, her hands full, her attention divided. A child sits nearby, watching their expression quiet, uncertain. You pause at the threshold. The room carries a different energy, not calm but controlled, focused on what needs to be done. The woman dips a cloth into a basin, wrings it out, then places it carefully on the forehead of someone lying on the bed. The motion is practice, repeated, part of a routine that has been learned through experience rather than instruction. You notice the details. The basin placed within easy reach. The cloth folded just so. The way her movements avoid unnecessary noise, as if quiet itself plays a role in care. Some historians have explored how informal caregiving within tenement households functioned as a critical support system, especially in the absence of accessible medical services, though the effectiveness of such care varied widely depending on knowledge and resources. As you watch, you can see both the strength and the limitation of that system. The person on the bed shifts slightly. Their breathing is uneven but steady enough to hold. The cloth remains in place, the woman adjusting it gently when it begins to slip. You step back. The room does not require your presence. It continues its work without interruption, just as the others do. You return to the hallway. The sounds feel different now, or perhaps your awareness of them has changed. Each cough, each voice, each small movement carries more weight, more meaning. You move toward the stairwell. The air shifts again as you approach it, becoming slightly more open, though still shaped by everything around it. You place your hand on the railing, feeling its familiar surface beneath your fingers. You pause. There is a quiet understanding forming, one that does not need to be spoken. Life here is not only about movement work and survival, it is also about care. You begin to descend. The steps creak softly beneath you, the sound steady grounding. The building continues to hold its many layers, each one unfolding alongside the others. You reach the lower level again. The entrance stands open, the street beyond still active, still loud, still full of motion. But now you carry something with you from inside. A sense of how easily that motion can pause, how quickly attention can turn inward when needed. You step toward the doorway, then stop. For a moment, you stand between the two worlds again. Behind you, the quiet work of care continues. Ahead, the city moves without pause, and you remain in the space between them, aware of both. You step fully outside again, and the street greets you with its steady, familiar motion. But something about it has shifted in your awareness. The noise feels sharper now, the movement more layered, as if you're beginning to notice details that once blended together. A small group has gathered near the entrance of the building, not in the loose, shifting way of customers around a cart, but in a more focused cluster. Their posture is different. Still but attentive, you move closer, drawn by the quiet sense that something unusual is happening. At the center stands a man with a notebook. He holds it open at his pencil, moving quickly as he writes. His gaze lifts occasionally, scanning the building, then returns to the page, Beside him, another figure adjusts a small camera mounted on a tripod, angling it carefully toward the entrance. You pause at the edge of the group. There is a brief exchange of words between the two men there, voices low but purposeful. The camera is adjusted again, the lens focused, the position refined. A widely recognized historical fact is that reformers, journalists and photographers in the early 20th century documented tenement conditions in an effort to raise public awareness and push for housing improvements. You're witnessing a moment that fits within that larger effort. The man with the camera steps back. He studies the scene, then signals to someone nearby. A woman and her child are gently guided into position near the doorway. They do not appear entirely comfortable, but they comply, their expressions settling into something neutral. The camera clicks. The sound is brief but distinct. A moment captured, fix preserved. You watch as the figures relax slightly afterward, stepping back into the flow of the street. The photographer adjusts his equipment again, preparing for another image, another angle, another attempt to show what this place is like. A lesser-known detail from the period mentions that some residents felt conflicted about being photographed or observed in this way, appreciating the potential for change, but also feeling exposed or misunderstood by outsiders. You can sense that tension here in the way people participate but do not fully engage. You shift your attention to the man with the notebook. He speaks now, asking questions of someone just outside the building. His tone is polite but direct. The answers come in short phrases, sometimes hesitant, sometimes more certain. He writes quickly, capturing what he can. You wonder what will become of these notes. Will they be read widely, prompting change? Or will they remain part of a larger collection of observations that only a few ever see? Historians continue to examine the true impact of these reform efforts, debating how much they directly improved living conditions versus how much change resulted from broader social and political shifts already underway. Standing here, the outcome feels certain, suspended between intention and result. You step slightly to the side. The group shifts as well, making room for movement for the continued flow of the street. The photographer takes another image, this time focusing on the building itself, its narrow facade, its windows stacked closely together. You glance upward. From this angle, the structure looks even more compressed, its height emphasized by the limited width. It rises, not imposing, but persistent. A woman exits the building, pausing briefly as she notices the camera. Her expression changes just slightly, then settles again. She continues on, adjusting her path to avoid the cluster without stopping. The moment passes. You take a slow breath. The air carries the same mix of scents as before, but now they feel part of something being observed, documented, translated into words and images that will travel beyond this street. You move a little farther down. Another figure stands nearby, this one speaking to a small group of residents. Their tone is different, more explanatory. They gesture toward the building, toward the windows, toward the entrance, as if outlining something that could be changed. Some accounts from the time describe the role of settlement house workers and housing inspectors who sought to educate residents about sanitation and advocate for better conditions, though their presence was not always welcomed or trusted. You can see that dynamic here in the way people listen, but also maintain a certain distance. You watch for a moment. The conversation continues, but it does not disrupt the flow of the street. It becomes part of it, another layer added to the already complex environment. You step back towards the entrance. The building remains as it was, ungapped in its structure, its rhythms continuing inside. The presence of observers does not alter the daily routines in any immediate way. You place your hand briefly against the wall. The surface is warm, carrying the heat of the day, the touch of countless others. It feels solid, unyielding, yet shaped by everything that happens within it. You turn slightly. The photographer is packing up now, folding the tripod, securing the camera. The man with the notebook closes it, tucking it under his arm. Their work here is done, at least for now. They move on. The street absorbs their departure without pause. You remain for a moment longer. There is a quiet understanding forming, one that sits somewhere between observation and experience. What you have seen is part of a larger effort to understand, to change, to improve. But the building, the street, the lives within them continue regardless. You step back inside. The doorway closes behind you and the Sounds shift once more, returning to the closer, more contained rhythm of the tenement. The work of the outside world fades. The work within remains. You remain inside this time, letting the door close behind you until the street becomes a distant layer rather than a constant presence. The building settles around you, again familiar now, its rhythm no longer surprising but still full of detail. The light has shifted, softer, lower. The day is beginning to lean toward evening. The hallway feels different, not quieter exactly but slower. Movements stretch slightly, footsteps carry less urgency, voices soften at the edges as if the day's demands are loosening their hold even if only a little. You move towards a room where the door stands open. Inside, the light comes from a small lamp placed near the centre of the table. It casts a warm, steady glow, illuminating hands, more than faces, objects, more than space. The rest of the room fades gently into shadow. You step closer. The table is covered again, but not with food this time. Fabric thread, small tools arranged within easy reach. Several figures sit around it, their posture slightly bent, their attention fixed on the work before them. Night work has begun. A firmly established historical point is that many tenement residents continued labour well into the evening hours, especially those involved in piecework where income depended on how much could be completed rather than how long one worked. You can see that pressure here in the way the work does not pause as daylight fades. The needle moves quickly, back and forth in and out of the fabric, catching the light with each motion. The rhythm is steady, almost hypnotic, repeated so often that it becomes a kind of background pulse within the room. You notice the faces now, tired but focused, not rushed but unwilling to stare. Each person works within their own pace, yet all remain connected through the shared task. A small but intriguing detail from contemporary accounts notes that some families use specific songs or quiet counting patterns to maintain a consistent sewing rhythm during long hours of work, turning repetitive labour into something that could be paced and endured. You listen carefully and begin to sense it. Not a full melody, but a faint, almost subconscious pattern in the way the movements align. You take a slow breath. The air carries the scent of fabric, again mixed now with the faint oil from the lamp. It is a dry, steady smell, one that settles rather than spreads. A child sits nearby. Not working, but not entirely separate either. Their eyes follow the movement of the needle, their bodies still as if absorbing the rhythm without yet participating. Occasionally they reach for a small piece of thread, mimicking the motions they see. You watch for a moment. Learning here does not always come through instruction. It comes through observation, through repetition, through presence. You shift your attention to the lamp. Its light flickers slightly as someone moves, then steadies again. It becomes the centre of the room in a way that the table was earlier, drawing everything inward, holding it together. Some scholars have examined whether the extension of labour into the home blurred the distinction between rest and work to such an extent that true leisure became difficult to define for many tenement families. As you stand here, the idea feels tangible. The day has not ended. It has simply changed form. You step slightly to the side as someone rises. A woman stretches her hands briefly, flexing her fingers, then returns to her seat without leaving the table. The pause lasts only a moment, enough to reset, not enough to stop. You glance toward the bed. It remains in place, but its role is postponed. It waits not yet needed as the work continues. Rest will come later when the tasks are complete or when the body can no longer continue. You take another breath. The room feels full, not just of people, but of effort that stretches across time, day into night, task into task. The boundaries blur. A quiet conversation begins at the far end of the table. Two voices low, almost indistinct, sharing something brief, perhaps a comment on the work, perhaps something unrelated, a small moment of connection within the larger routine. The exchange does not interrupt the rhythm. It folds into it. You notice the steadiness. No sudden movements, no sharp sounds. Everything flows in a controlled, continuous way as if the room itself encourages it. You step back toward the fair doorway. The hallway beyond feels cooler by comparison, though, only slightly. The sounds there are softer now, the building settling into its evening state. You pause at the threshold. Inside, the work continues, The lamp holds its light. The needle moves again and again, each motion part of a larger pattern that stretches beyond this single room. You step out. The door remains open, the light spilling into the hallway, marking the space as active ongoing. You begin to walk. The building carries this rhythm from room to room. Some quieter, some still busy, each one adjusting to the time of day in its own way. You reach the stairwell. The light from above has dimmed further, replaced by small points of illumination scattered throughout the building. Lamps, candles, early electric bulbs, each one contributing to the overall glow. You place your hand on the railing. It feels familiar now, grounding. You pause for a moment, listening. The sounds are softer, but they remain. A voice here, a movement there, the steady continuation of life within the structure. You begin to descend The steps carry you downward, back toward the entrance where the street still waits, though changed now by the approaching night. Behind you the work goes on, and it will for some time yet. You reach the lower floor again, but this time you do not step straight outside. Instead, you pause near the doorway, noticing how the evening has changed the atmosphere on both sides of it. The street beyond is still active, but the sharp urgency of the morning has softened into something looser, more fluid. You step out slowly. The light has shifted into a dimmer tone, the sky fading into a muted shade that settles over the buildings without fully darkening them. Lamps begin to appear along the street, their glow uneven but steady, creating small islands of light that people move between. The sound is different now, still constant but less pressing. Conversations stretch longer, movements slow, just enough to be noticed. The day's work has not ended, but its intensity has eased. You walk along the edge of the street. A small group has gathered near a pushcart, not to buy but to talk. Their voices rise and fall in a rhythm that feels relaxed, punctuated by brief moments of laughter that carry farther in the cooler air. You catch a few words, fragments of stories exchanges that seem to have no immediate purpose beyond being shared. A commonly observed feature of tenement neighbourhoods is that the street often served as an extension of the home, especially in the evenings, providing space for social interaction that the cramped apartments could not accommodate. You can see that shift clearly now. The street is no longer just a place of work or transit. It becomes a place of gathering. You continue forward. Near the corner, a man leans against the wall holding a small instrument. He begins to play the sound soft at first, then growing slightly stronger as people nearby turn their attention toward him. The melody is simple, repeating, but it carries a warmth that settles into the space around it. You pause. The music does not demand attention, it invites it. People continue their conversations, but their tone shifts slightly, adjusting to the presence of the sound. A lesser-known anecdote from the period suggests that informal street performances, whether music, storytelling, or small acts of entertainment, were a common way for residents to create moments of relief and connection without needing formal venues. You can feel that intention here in the way the music blends with everything else, rather than standing apart. A child moves closer to the musician. They stand still, watching their expression focused. After a moment, they begin to sway slightly, their body responding to the rhythm in a way that feels instinctive. You take a slow breath. The air feels cooler now, carrying fewer of the heavy layers from earlier in the day. It moves more freely between the buildings, offering a subtle sense of relief. You glance back toward the tenement. The windows glow softly, each one holding its own small light. From some you can hear faint voices. From others, the quiet movement of people settling into the evening. The building remains full, but its energy has shifted. You turn back to the street. A group of women sits together, on low stools or makeshift seats near the curb. Their conversation flows easily, their hands occasionally moving as they speak, emphasizing certain points, sharing something that feels both ordinary and important. You notice how they occupy the space, not temporarily, but with a sense of familiarity, as if this part of the street belongs to them in a way that is understood rather than claimed. You step closer, then continue past, letting their voices become part of the background again. Some scholars have considered whether these informal social gatherings played a significant role in maintaining emotional resilience among tenement residents, offering support networks that were not structured but deeply effective. As you observe, The idea feels convincing. The connections here are quiet but strong. You move further down the street. A boy runs past you, his footsteps quick, his laughter trailing behind him. Another follows their movement, weaving through the slower pace of the adults without disrupting it. The energy is lighter now, less constrained by the demands of the day. You notice the change in posture around you. Shoulders lower slightly, steps become less rigid. Even those who continue to work do so with a different rhythm, one that allows for brief pauses, for small exchanges that were not possible earlier. You pause near a doorway. From inside, you hear the faint continuation of work, the steady motion you observed before. But here on the street, that rhythm is balanced by something else. Conversation music, shared presence. You take another breath. The contrast feels important. Inside effort continues contained and focused. Outside that effort softens into connection, into moments that stretch beyond necessity. You begin to walk back toward the building. The entrance stands open. The transition between street and interior as fluid as ever. People move in and out, carrying with them the shift in atmosphere, blending the two spaces together. You step just inside. The hallway receives you again, its air slightly cooler. Now it sounds quieter, but still present. The building is settling, but not sleeping. You pause. From here, you can still hear the music outside, faint but steady. It reaches into the hallway, mixing with the softer sounds within. You place your hand on the wall. It feels less warm than before, the heat of the day beginning to fade. The surface holds the memory of it, but not the full intensity. You listen. The building and the street exist together, each one influencing the other, each one shaping the way the evening unfolds. You take a slow step forward. The night is beginning, and with it a different kind of life continues. You remain just inside the building as the evening deepens, and without any clear moment of transition, your awareness shifts toward another season entirely. Not because the air suddenly changes, but because the structure around you begins to reveal how it responds when the warmth of the day is no longer present. You imagine the cold. It settles into the same spaces you have been moving through, but in a very different way. Where heat once lingered, now there is absence. Where air once felt heavy, now it feels sharp. You begin to climb again. The stairwell carries a faint chill, especially near the walls where the warmth fades more quickly. Your hand on the railing feels the difference. The wood is no longer warm from the day. It holds a cooler tone, something closer to the temperature of the air itself. A well-established historical reality is that heating in tenement buildings was often limited and uneven, relying on small stoves or shared systems that could not fully warm every room, leaving many residents to endure significant cold during winter months. You begin to sense how that unevenness shapes the experience of the space. You reach the next landing. The hallway feels tighter in the cold, not physically smaller but more contained. The air does not move as easily. It holds still, carrying only the faintest trace of warmth from the rooms beyond. A door opens. Inside, the contrast is immediate. A stove burns in the corner, its heat concentrated in a small area that people gather around without needing to be told. The rest of the room remains cooler, the warmth unable to spread evenly. You step closer. A woman stands near the stove, her hands extended toward it, turning them slightly to catch the heat on both sides. Her movements are slow dolores, as if conserving energy while drawing as much warmth as possible. A child sits nearby, wrapped in layers that seem too large for their frame. Their posture is as close knees drawn in shoulders, slightly hunched. The body adapts to the cold instinctively, making itself smaller, holding heat where it can. A lesser-known detail from contemporary accounts notes that some families used bricks or stones heated near the stove and then placed in beds or wrapped in cloth to provide temporary warmth during the night. You can imagine that practice here small solutions created within limited means. You step back into the hallway. The cold returns subtle but persistent. It settles into your clothing, your breath, the way you move. You notice how your pace changes slightly, your body adjusting without conscious thought. You continue upward. The higher floors feel colder still, the distance from the ground and the street offering less protection. The walls seem to hold less warmth, the air thinner, sharper. You reach another landing. A door stands slightly open, and inside the arrangement of the room reflects the season. The table has been moved closer to the stove. The bed is layered with additional fabric blankets stacked to create insulation rather than comfort. You pause at the threshold. The people inside move differently, slower, more contained. Each action measured to preserve energy to avoid unnecessary exposure to the cold. A man adjusts a piece of coal in the stove, his movements careful, deliberate. The fuel is limited, it must last. Some historians have explored how access to heating resources varied widely among tenement residents, influencing not only comfort but also health outcomes during the winter months, though the full extent of that impact continues to be examined. As you observe, the connection feels immediate. Warmth is not evenly distributed, it must be managed. You take a slow breath. The air inside the room carries a faint scent of smoke mixed with the dryness of heated air. It is not entirely pleasant, but it signals something essential. Survival maintained through careful use of limited resources. You step away. The hallway receives you again, its colder air wrapping around you, reminding you of the difference between inside and out, between warmth and its absence. You move toward the stairwell. The steps feel firmer now, the wood less forgiving under your feet. The sound they make is sharper, more defined, as if the cold has tightened everything slightly. You begin to descend. The lower levels feel marginally warmer. The difference subtle but noticeable. The building holds heat unevenly, creating pockets where it lingers longer. You reach the entrance. The door opens to the outside, and the cold there is more direct, more immediate. It does not settle. It moves, pressing against your face, your hands, your breath. You step just beyond at the threshold. The street looks different in the cold, less crowded but not empty. People move quickly, their steps purposeful, their bodies wrapped in layers that protect but also restrict. You notice the way they carry themselves. Shoulders raised, hands tucked close, movements efficient, minimizing time spent exposed. A small curious detail from the period suggests that some residents would gather in public spaces like bakeries or shops, not only for goods but also to take advantage of the warmth, extending their time there whenever possible. You can imagine that instinct here, the search for heat-shaping movement through the sea. You take a slow breath. The cold fills your lungs more sharply than the warm air did, clearing but also demanding. You turn back towards the building. The doorway offers a return to something less extreme, even if it is not entirely comfortable. You step inside again, the shift immediate, the cold softening just enough to be managed. You pause. The building holds both extremes, heat that lingers too long, cold that settles too deeply, and within it people adjust. They layer, they gather, they endure. You place your hand on the railing once more. It feels cool beneath your fingers, but familiar. You begin to climb again, because here the seasons change, but the rhythm continues. You remain on the stairs for a moment longer than usual, not because you are tired, but because something quieter has begun to take shape around you. The building is still active, still full, but the pace has shifted again. The evening has deepened, and with it comes a different kind of attention. You begin to move, but more slowly. The sounds are softer now. Fewer footsteps, fewer voices raised above the others. What remains is more contained, more personal, as if each room has turned inward. You reach a landing where a door stands slightly open. Inside, the light is dim, coming from a single lamp placed near the window. You step closer, drawn by the quiet tone of voices that carry just enough to reach you. A man sits at the table, his posture relaxed but attentive. Across from him, a woman listens, her hands resting still for once. The usual movement of the room has paused, replaced by something more reflective. Between them, the space feels open, in a way that has nothing to do with size. You listen. The man speaks slowly, choosing his words with care. You catch fragments. Work, opportunity, a place further uptown, a possibility that seems distant but not impossible. A commonly accepted historical understanding is that many tenement residents held strong aspirations for upward mobility, hoping to move to better housing or more stable employment as their circumstances improved. You begin to see that hope not as an abstract idea, but as something spoken quietly at a table like this. The woman responds. Her voice is softer but steady. She asks questions, practical ones. What would it require? How long it might take? What would need to change? You notice the balance. Hope but measured, possibility but grounded. You take a slow breath. The air in the room feels lighter than in others you have visited, not because it is physically different, but because of what is being shared within it. A lesser-known detail from personal accounts of the time suggests that many families kept informal plans or small savings hidden away, even in modest amounts, as a way of preparing for future opportunities that might arise unexpectedly. You imagine that here, a few coins set aside, a plan formed in quiet conversation. You step back slightly. The voices continue, but they lower further, becoming part of the room rather than reaching into the hallway. You move on. Further down the hall, another door stands closed, but the sound behind it is different. Not conversation, but something quieter still. You pause, listening. A single voice, speaking softly, almost as if to itself. Repeating phrases, perhaps rehearsing, perhaps remembering. You cannot be certain. You remain where you are. The tone carries a sense of focus, of intention directed inward. It feels private, even though the building does not fully allow for privacy. Some historians have considered whether the close quarters of tenement life encouraged individuals to develop strong inner worlds as a form of mental space, though this idea remains difficult to measure and continues to be discussed. As you listen, the possibility feels present. You continue toward the stairwell. The light has dimmed further, the building now lit mostly by small scattered sources. Each one marks a point of activity, a place where the day has not yet fully ended. You place your hand on the railing. It feels cool, steady grounding. You pause for a moment, letting the quiet settle around you. From above, a faint sound. Laughter, but softer than before. Not the bright energy of earlier in the evening, but something gentler shared between a few voices rather than many. You look up. The staircase curves out of sight, but the sound travels down, carrying with it a sense of connection that does not require you to see its source. You begin to descend. The steps creak softly beneath you, the sound familiar now, part of the rhythm you have come to expect. As you move, you notice how the building feels at this hour. Not empty, not still, but settled. Each room holding its own quiet version of the day's end. Conversations that turn inward. Thoughts that stretch beyond the immediate. You reach the lower level. The entrance stands open, but the street beyond has changed. The movement is slower, the voices fewer, the light softer. You step just outside. The air feels cooler now, carrying a faint calm that was not present earlier. People move in smaller groups, their pace unhurried, their attention less divided. You look back at the building. Its windows glow softly, each one a small point of light against the darkening sky. Inside you know what continues. Work in some rooms, rest in others, conversations like the one you just heard, shaping thoughts that reach beyond the present. A question lingers quietly. How many of those hopes will take shape and how many will remain just out of reach? Scholars continue to explore the long-term outcomes of immigrant families in tenement districts, examining patterns of movement, opportunity and limitation, though the full picture remains complex and varied. Standing here, the future feels uncertain but not absent. You take a slow breath. The night is settling in. You turn back towards the doorway. Inside the building waits, holding its many stories, its many possibilities, all unfolding at once. You step in and carry those quiet hopes with you. You step fully back inside, letting the doorway close behind you until the street becomes only a distant murmur. The building holds you again, but now it feels softer, as if the edges have been gently worn down by the passing of the day. The light is low, not gone, but fading into something more diffuse, more forgiving. Lamps glow in scattered rooms, their light slipping through doorways and along the hallway floor in thin, quiet lines. You move slowly, your steps matching the pace that the building itself seems to prefer now. There is no urgency left, only continuation. You pass a door where the lamp has already been turned down. Inside, figures rest, their shapes softened by shadow, their breathing steady, rising and falling in a rhythm that feels almost shared. The bed which earlier held work now holds sleep. The table once crowded with activity sits still, its surface cleared or left as it was waiting for the next day. You continue along the hallway. The sounds are different now, not absent but subdued. A faint shift of fabric, the quiet creak of a floorboard. a distant voice lowered to a near whisper. Each sound feels spaced out, given room to exist without overlapping too much with the others. A widely accepted historical observation is that despite the density and constant activity of tenement life, nights often brought a fragile kind of quiet shaped not by silence but by exhaustion as residents settled into whatever rest they could find. You begin to feel that quiet now, not as emptiness, but as a gentle easing. You reach the stairwell. The steps rise and fall in the same familiar curve, but now they seem less demanding. Your hand finds the railing again, its surface cool, steady, unchanged. You descend a few steps, then pause. From above, a faint sound, a lullaby perhaps, or something close to it. Soft, repetitive, barely rising above the threshold of hearing. It drifts down the stairwell, settling around you without asking for attention. You close your eyes for a moment. The sound does not need to be understood. It simply exists, carrying with it a sense of calm that spreads slowly, almost without effort. A small but touching detail recorded at impersonal accounts mentions that even in the most crowded and difficult conditions, parents often created quiet bedtime rituals for their children using song or simple repetition to bring a sense of stability to the end of the day. You can feel that intention here in the softness of the sound. You open your eyes. The stairwell remains the building unchanged, yet everything feels slightly different. Slower, softer. You continue downward. Each step brings you closer to the entrance, but there is no pull to leave. The building itself has become enough, holding the final moments of the day within its walls. At the lower level, you pause again. The hallway stretches ahead, dim but familiar. Doors closed, lights low. The movement that once filled this space has settled into stillness. You take a slow breath. The air feels lighter now, not because it has changed, but because your awareness of it has softened. The layers remain, but they no longer press in the same way. Some historians have reflected on how the end of the day in tenement life created a shared pause, a moment where individual struggles eased into collective rest, even if only briefly, though the extent of that shared experience continues to be discussed. Standing here, the idea feels present, carried in the quiet. You move toward the entrance, but stop just short of stepping outside. The door stands closed now, the street beyond reduced to a faint distant hum. The building has turned inward, holding its residents within a more contained world. You turn back. The hallway, the stairs, the rooms you have passed through all remain part of a single continuous space. Each one holds its own version of the day, its own memory of what has happened within it. You begin to walk again slowly without direction. There is no need to go anywhere specific now. The movement itself becomes the focus, each step a continuation of what has come before. You pass the alcove where water was carried. Now it is still, the basin empty, the bucket resting quietly. The effort of the day has paused, leaving behind only the objects that made it possible. You pass the room where work continued under lamplight. The lamp is dimmed, now the table cleared or left as it was, the figures resting their hands finally still. You pass the space where voices once filled the air. Now only the faintest traces remain, echoes that fade as you move further along. You reach the stairwell once more. You place your hand on the railing, feeling its familiar shape, its steady presence. You pause there, letting the stillness settle fully. The building does not sleep completely. It never does, but it rests. And within that rest, there is a quiet rhythm that continues, softer now, slower, carrying everything that has happened into the space of night. You take a final, slow breath and let it out gently. The air moves with you, then settles again, becoming part of the stillness that surrounds you. You remain there for a moment longer. Then, without needing to move further, you allow yourself to simply be within the space held by its quiet, its rhythm, its steady presence. The night continues, and you drift with it. Now, as the building settles into its deeper quiet, you allow your own pace to slow even further. The edges of the space soften, the sounds becoming more distant, more like gentle impressions than distinct events. You notice how your breath has changed longer, now more even, matching the calm that surrounds you. There is nothing more you need to follow. No staircase to climb, no doorway to pause at, no voices to trace through the walls. Only the steady presence of the place itself. You imagine the rooms around you, each one holding its own quiet scene. Someone turning slightly in their sleep, a blanket adjusted without waking, the faintest movement of air near a window, small details unfolding without urgency, without interruption. The building holds all of it, not tightly, not heavily, but with a kind of quiet patience. It has done this before, countless times, carrying each day into night, each moment into rest. You feel the rhythm now. It does not ask anything of you. It simply continues. Your awareness begins to drift, not away, but inward. The sounds that once felt close now settle into the background, blending into something softer, something easier to rest within. The stairwell, the hallway, the rooms, they remain, but they no longer need your attention. They are simply there, and you are here within that same quiet space. Your and slows again. The air moves gently, barely noticeable, just enough to remind you that everything continues even in stillness. There is no need to think about what comes next. No need to hold on to the details. They fade naturally like the last light of evening giving way to night. You remain for a moment longer, then another, and gradually, without effort, without intention, you allow yourself to drift. Sweet dreams,